Hello, YouTube. Today we're going to do a little bit of a different video. Today we're going to look at which class is best for which race. You're making a new character. You're trying to decide which race do you want to be. Now, of course, as always, the choice is ultimately up to you. Maybe you don't like dwarves, so you want to be anything else that's a dwarf, even though dwarf is the best option for something. Or maybe you don't have all the races unlocked, right? Because you have to purchase River Hobbit, Stout Axe, and High Elf. They come with expansions, or some come with expansions, some don't. So I'm gonna try to give you a variety of options, but ultimately, in most scenarios, there is a so-called better option or the best in slot option for certain classes. Going to ignore as many useless traits as possible. All of the races have like an active ability of some sort, like a stealth or a headbutt, a rock throw. There's some weird utility things like buffing certain like fellowship maneuver abilities, like the spider or the Ents March or whatever. Eagles, the healing of the eagle. We're going to ignore that stuff. That just makes this overly complicated when it really doesn't need to be, and it's not going to come into effect as much as the other stuff. But there is some utility things that we will consider. Other things to consider are weapon passives. So all swords will have a 2% parry bonus. This makes it very ideal for tanks. It's not necessary, but it does make it more ideal for tanks. All axes reduce the enemy's armor. So because the enemy's armor is reduced, technically you and the rest of the group is doing more damage. So that kind of comes into play in a few scenarios, but again, it's not needed. It's just something worth mentioning. And I will, as I go through kind of each race, so to speak, I will put up a little screenshot of all of their traits, but I'll put stuff. There'll be two links below. One will be for passive traits, which we'll go over, and then their actual race traits, so that you can also see and kind of make your decision on there, because it'll show more utility things. But quickly going over stuff, and I'll just hide my camera here. So men have Gift of Men, Diminishing of Mankind, Easily Inspired, and Strong Men. So all of the races have these passive ones. All of the passive traits do increase if they're stat related, like might or fate. They do increase over time. So Strong Men, anything that's a passive increase, or like a buff, caps out at 1200 at level 150. At level 60 or 65 if you're on the legendary servers, I don't know the exact value, but just know that the number does go up as your level increases. So at level 150, the might increase caps at 1200. But this goes the same for the will. Where is it? So you lose one will at level 1, and this does steadily go, it does get worse as you level. So at 150, you're losing a total of 477. This is just an example. I'm not going to go over every single trait, but those stat ones, just know that they do increase as you level, or get worse if they're a negative trait as you level. Stuff that doesn't increase with level is like the 5% incoming healing. This caps at 5%. It stays that way from beginning to end, and that's just the way it is. There's some regeneration stuff that increases over level, but then there's like mitigation stuff that stays consistent at 1% and doesn't go up. So just wanted to quickly mention that before we go into all of the race stuff. Things that I'm going to also ignore is stuff like Fate. Fate has no effect on any classes. All it does is it increases your power and your out of combat power regen. That is it. The only exception to this is Beorning, where Fate increases their health and might do some other things. But the only class or race that can be a Beorning is a Beorning. You cannot be a River Hobbit Beorning. You cannot be an Elf Beorning. You can only be a Beorning. So therefore, we're just going to ignore Fate in every scenario. Fate has no effect. But quickly going down the races, Dwarves get a axe bonus to both one-handed and two-handed axes of 5%. They have a shield or a block increase of 7,560 at level 150, and they also have a vitality increase that they give to the entire group, and they have a 50% damage reduction for, I think it's like 8 seconds or something, or 5 seconds. And then they have their and I'm going to also ignore the travel skills, because the travel skills don't affect your raid efficiency, so to speak. All right, moving down to Elf. Elves have a 5% damage bonus to bow, a 5% damage bonus to one-handed sword, and a 75% parry chance that they activate for about, again, like the 5 to 8 seconds. I don't remember the exact number. Moving to Hobbits. Hobbits have an increase to their might of 1,200 at level 150. They have a 5% damage bonus to one-handed and two-handed clubs. They also have a +2 hope bonus to the Fellowship. However, this does not stack with other bonuses, so I don't think it's worth mentioning. Kind of like, or really considering, kind of like how Elves also have a bonus to the Fellowship's power, right? I think they increased the power by like 3 or 5% or something, but increasing the raids or your group's power that's not going to determine which class you should play, really, by any means. Now going on to the race of men. Men have a increase of 1,200 will, but because they start with a negative will, right, you have to remember that they lose 477 will at 150, but they gain 1,200, so you're basically looking at, just to keep the numbers nice and round, you're basically looking at an 800 increase of will, rather than a full 1,200. Men have a 5% bonus to one-handed and two-handed swords, and they also have an increase of block, parry, evade rating. It's 9,500 rating of evade at 150, and then 7,500 rating of block and parry at 150. They also have a 5% increase to your party's morale, which that's massive. It's basically a buff, right, that goes up to the group or your Fellowship in the raid, like your group members, by 5%. They also have a heal, which at I think it caps out at 140 or 145. I don't know what the exact value is at 150, but at 140 or 145, it's like 63,000 morale and healing. So that's pretty good for a utility thing. It might come in handy for like tank classes. We are skipping Beorning, now going to High Elf. They have an increase of 1200 will, but they also lose will, much like the race of men. So that's something to keep in mind. They have the Wrath of the Firstborn ability, which increases the Fellowship's party, or increases the damage of the Fellowship or party by 3%. I think it is. They also so that applies to the entire party. Then High Elves have a 5% light damage bonus, and they also gain a 5% damage to one-handed and two-handed swords. Some people really like the stun ability that the High Elves have, or the revive ability. However, the revive ability only works out of combat. The stun ability can be useful. It has a bit of a weird animation. I'm not going to consider these when I'm naming what's the best for each class, but it is something that I just wanted to mention in case it matters to you. Now moving on to Stout Axes. So Stout Axes gain a whole bunch of stats. Not only is their will incredibly high because they have their passive will, which goes up to 1200. They also have a will trait. Oh no, wait, that was changed. They used to have that. Never mind. So they have their passive will increase, but their will trait that they have, I think, was changed from increasing their will to now giving them a craft experience modifier. Which is just, if you like crafting, then pick a Stout Axe, is basically the message there. But yeah, so they have an increase in vitality. They have an increase in agility and might, which caps out at 1200. The vitality caps out at 1500. And then they have a plus 3% fire damage and a plus 5% one-handed, two-handed axe, and a plus 1% dagger damage. Utility-wise, they have a 1% mitigation to shadow damage, and this can be applied to the entire fellowship. They also have a 75% block chance for 5 to 8 seconds or whatever it is. And then finally, we have River Hobbits. River Hobbits are kind of fun as they have a lot of weird little buffs, but they have the 1200 agility increase. They have a increase of maximum morale. They have a frost mitigation of 1%. And then though they have their will gets increased, they do have a will debuff, so it's not actually going to be 1200. It'll be closer to the 800 value when at max level. They also then gain a frost damage increase of 5%, a lightning damage increase of 3%, a dagger and spear damage increase of 5%, and they also apply an evade buff of, I don't remember how much it is exactly. I've never played a River Hobbit, but I think it's like a small 5% evade chance, but for the entire fellowship, which is kind of fun. But yeah, so that's the breakdown of all the races. I'll put the links in the description, but now let's move on to we'll go down the class list here. Burglars, something to keep in mind is all burglars gain a 5% dagger bonus at level 45. So that's all daggers, no matter your race, your daggers will do 5% more damage at level 45. River Hobbits have an additional 5%, bringing the total to 10%. And because River Hobbits gain more agility, this puts River Hobbits the best race for burglars. But if you don't have River Hobbits or you don't like Hobbits, good secondary options are Stout Axes, which is kind of fun because now as a Stout Axe burglar, you can now use axes. And with axes, you also have a 5% damage bonus. However, they still gain a 1% dagger bonus as well, bringing the total up to 6%. Stout Axes also gain vitality, might, and agility. So they're a good secondary option. For the free races, elves gain a 5% damage bonus, bringing it equal to daggers. They also gain more agility, so that just helps out with their damage and crit for burglars. Men have a 5% sword damage bonus as well, so it's also the same as the dagger bonus. And men gain a might bonus, so not as useful as agility, but still good. Brawlers are a little bit weird because brawlers use their own unique weapons with like their gauntlet punching weapons. So because they're their own unique weapon and no races buff that unique weapon, we're not looking at any weapon damage bonuses. This is coming down just to pure stats. So this makes Stout Axes technically the best option because Stout Axes increase might, agility, and the vitality. So all three main stats there are being increased. But you could also look at men and elves for brawlers as they're gaining agility or might. Hobbits gain might as well, though it's at a lower level. It's not as much as men. But yeah, so that's, you could also look at River Hobbits and River Hobbits for agility. Normal dwarves gain might and vitality, but they lose agility. So there's some options there, but honestly, the best option is technically Stout Axe because they just gain so much. Captains are really weird and kind of get a little bit complicated, and it depends on what you're doing with the captain. But to start, captains have a 5% halberd damage from the class itself. Now, no other classes increase the halberd damage more. So now but what that does is it now ignores the damage bonus from all the races, right? Because now every weapon you're going to use is going to be 5%. Now, this is where an argument can be made where swords are better for tanking because you have a 2% parry chance. Axes are better from a damage standpoint because you have the armor rend on it, so now you and everyone else is doing more damage overall. But aside from that, the only other thing to really look at is High Elves, as High Elves not only have the sword damage, but they also have the 5% light damage bonus and the party bonus of like the 3% damage bonus to the entire fellowship kind of thing. I know the light damage isn't massive on Captain, but a few of their skills do light damage, and it's some of their highest hitting abilities overall. So the 5% bonus to light damage can matter in later levels when it's buffing their highest hitting abilities. But if you wanted, if you're not into elves or you're just looking at a pure stat bonus, then the best option is Stout Axes again because of might, agility, and vitality. Or just base race options would be men and dwarves because they gain more might. Dwarves also gain vitality, but they lose the agility. But from a utility standpoint, or if you're tanking, I would argue that men are better because they get a block, parry, evade, they can heal themselves, they have the 5% morale bonus to the entire group, And on top of that, they also have their 5% incoming healing. And what this means is that as the race of man, you receive more healing than any other race. So if a minstrel heals you for 100 health, it's actually going to heal you specifically for 105 health, as just an example. Dwarves don't have that. Dwarves do get a block rating, and they have like the damage reduction ability, but I still think there's a slight edge to the race of men, and you could argue in some scenarios it's even a little bit better than high elves, but I didn't want to dismiss the light damage that high elves get just because that can matter in some scenarios. But from a utility standpoint, men do have more, and that could make them better tanks mathematically. Champions, quite easy. Stout axes are the best champions, just again because they have a might, agility, and vitality increase. Their 3 main stats are going up. They're better. As secondary options, men have increased might, dwarves have increased might, elves have increased agility, which gives them more crit, but men and dwarves are a good secondary option. Guards, because again of the tanking thing, can get a little bit more complicated. And not to say that, because we just went through champion, that you can't tank on champion, but I'm really trying to focus on just the main things that are done with the class, right? Brawlers can also tank, but they use different weapons, and so you'd have to just look at the utility standpoint. But I'm really trying to look at the stuff that people do the most of with these classes. So guards are the only class that have a hammer damage bonus. So if you really like hammers, guards are the class for you, and no other race buffs hammer damage. So this means from just all the damage type bonuses that races get, everything is equal across the board. All of the weapons will do the same amount of damage. But now where things get tricky again is swords give you the parry rating, which some would say are better for tanking. Axe do the armor rend, so therefore with the boss having lower armor, everyone's doing more damage, so that's something to consider as well. But if we're going back to tanking, because men have this sword damage bonus, and they have that 2%, swords have that 2% parry, men also have the parry, block, and evade increase, and they also have all the survive. They have the buff, the incoming healing, and all that good stuff, just like Captain. So men are better tanks, but if we're looking at a pure damage side of it, then this is where stout axes and dwarves are going to do more damage because they have the axe damage bonus. Stout axes, of course, have the might, vitality, and agility increase. Dwarves just have the might and vitality, but lose out on the agility. But dwarves have a better survivability side of it with the mitigations, the blocks, where stout axes have less of that. Hunter, super simple. Bow damage and agility comes from elves, so elves are just the best race for hunters. Plain and simple. Secondary options, you could do stout axes again because of their multiple stat increases. And they also technically do more fire damage, I believe. There's like a 3% fire damage bonus, which does apply to fire oils. And they also have the agility buff, so they're a good secondary option, but elves have the bow damage, which is, of course, just buffs Hunter all across the board. So elves, by far the best. Lore Master, this is where River Hobbits shine the most, where they do 3% more lightning damage, and this, though it only applies to a certain amount of skills, it does add up a lot. Lore Master's biggest hitting abilities that are lightning is Staff Strike, which they spam a lot, and then Lightning Storm and Lightning Strike. A lot of their damage comes from those three sources. It's not their highest hitting sources, but it is a large part of their damage. So 3% on top of those skills is massive. River Hobbits also have their will increase, though it's not 1200 like some other races, and it's only 800 because of their penalty they have in their passive traits. It's combining that with the lightning damage increase, they are just the best options. High Elves and Men both have their will increase, both do more sword damage, which can help, their melee abilities of the Lore Master, which is nice. And they both also just have the negative will trait. So High Elves and Men are good secondary options. Mariner is I haven't played this class before, so I don't know all of their damaging abilities, but I believe they have some weird frost stuff. They have some weird fire abilities. So there could be an argument made where Stout Axes, because of fire damage, could do more damage in certain scenarios. River Hobbits do more frost damage, so that could do more in certain scenarios. But I don't believe it's the main source of the Mariner damage, so I've decided to ignore that and just look at stats and the other weapons. So Stout Axes are interesting because not only do they have the three main stat abilities of Might, Agility, and Vitality being increased, but it also allows Mariners to use axes, and that's kind of fun. Some races, though they give the damage bonus to certain weapons, some races don't allow you to use that weapon, though. Stout Axes allow you to use axes. So this means that a Mariner could use an axe and gain the 5% damage bonus. And because it's an axe, it's lowering armor. And again, that just means a little bit more damage in the long run. So I would say that Stout Axes are the best race, once again, for Mariners. River Hobbits and Men are good secondary options because they're either gaining a sword or dagger increase, and they both have an ability increase of either Might or Agility. Might for raw damage, Agility for damage and crit. Minstrel, plain and simple, High Elf, by far the best option for Minstrel. Nothing impacts healing. There's not a single race that has a healing increase that's available to Minstrel. So that means that the only other thing to look at is their damage output. And Minstrel's redline damage output is one of the highest, if not the highest, at endgame right now. Obviously, this could change in the future, but as of right now, it is the highest damaging class. So High Elves buffing light damage by 5% and having more will, it just makes it an easy choice. Having every single red line ability of the Minstrel doing more damage is massive. Secondary options could be River Hobbit or Men for just more, for having a higher will increase. Moving on to now Rune Keeper. Rune Keeper, River Hobbit shines once again because they're doing more frost damage or lightning damage and have the increase in will. Stout Axes have the fire damage option. Something to consider depending on how you want to play Lore Master, Rune Keeper. If you're looking for even more options, High Elf or Men are the next best option because of their increase to will. Finally, that brings us to Warden. Wardens have a base of 2% sword damage increase, 2% club damage increase, and a 7% spear damage increase. So, this means that as a River Hobbit, your spear damage is going to be increased by 12%. That is insanely high and definitely makes a difference. Now, not all of the damage, though, from a warden is done with a spear. A large majority of it is, yes, but there's also then their light damage from all of their fist gambits. This is where High Elf can shine, because High Elves have the 5% light damage increase, but they also have a 5% sword damage increase. So this means that a sword is now going to do the same amount of damage as a spear, unless you're a River Hobbit. So if you're going to be tanking on a warden, then a High Elf might be more beneficial, because now your sword is going to do the same amount of damage and you're gaining the 2% parry chance. If you're looking for just base race options, men and elves have the sword damage increase of 7%. And something to also note as well is wardens have an extra 2% parry chance with swords. So other classes who use swords get 2% from a sword, but a warden with a sword gets 2% from the sword and then an additional 2% from warden passives, making it a total of 4%. So this benefits those classes that are good at tanking, like men. But High Elves still do a little bit more damage than men and elves. River Hobbits are going to do even more damage than High Elves, I think, overall. So I would go River Hobbits the best, High Elves very close second, and then men or elves from there. But yeah, that includes all the races. So to quickly refresh, River Hobbit. Brawler is Stout Axe. Captain would be Stout Axe. Champion, Stout Axe. Guardian, depending on what you're doing, Stout Axe or men. Hunter.Elves. Loremaster, River Hobbit. Mariner, Stout Axe. Minstrel, High Elf. Rune Keeper, River Hobbit. Warden, River Hobbit, High Elf. So if you're noticing a trend, there's a lot of River Hobbits and there's a lot of Stout Axes, with a couple of High Elves. So these non-base races are really good. River Hobbits are really good for the tactical classes. And some others like Burglar, of course. But mostly just, the two main tactical classes. High Elf makes Minstrel really good, but then Stout Axe is just really good for all of those other classes that are in melee. Brawler, Champion, Guardian. You could argue Warden in some scenarios if you really wanted to, but that's kind of how it's designed right now, right? So if we have Captain, Champion, Guardian, Brawler, Mariner, Warden all covered, and River Hobbit is doing Rune Keeper, Loremaster, High Elf does Minstrel, the only other one left is Hunter, and the best choice for Hunter is Elf. So that's just the way it is. Men overall are better at tanking just because of all the utility they provide. They provide the most utility and the most benefits to the group as a whole, and they're the easiest to heal. So if you're a tank, and you really love tanking, the race of man is your best option in majority of scenarios. Just if you're looking at doing damage over tanking, then that's where something like a Stout Axe in those scenarios is going to do a little bit more. But yeah, so that concludes the video. I hope you found it helpful. Leave a comment with your favorite combos. I mean, there is stuff that we didn't talk about, like Hobbits and River Hobbits have their Feigned Death, which are super fun to use, right? Hobbits throw rocks, and that can be kind of fun. Being a dwarf captain is very unique these days. Being a river hobbit or a hobbit lore master is very unique these days. So this is just, there's some fun combos out there. Don't take this as the do or die. You're not going to be declined from a group because you're the wrong race. This is purely just for like those number crunchers, those min maxers. I want to be the most efficient as possible. What's the best way to do it? That's what this is for. But I'd love to hear your fun combos and the reasons why behind your choices, because there's some fun stuff out there. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.